Hello, and welcome to Sacred Mindshift Circle. I'm your host, Dahlia Deborah Donalds, and today I'm joined by Deena Kelaita, and she is a holistic nutritionist from Australia, and she's going to share some insights on gut healing, IBS, genetic testing, and simple tools like grounding to support emotional wellness. So, hello, Deena, how are you this morning?
Hi, Dahlia. I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
Okay, so Deena, let me know, how did you get into nutrition? Did you have any kind of experience that led you to want to become a clinical nutritionist, or did you just really find it fascinating?
Great question. Great question. So I, Dahlia, have been a patient who became a practitioner. And so essentially when I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition called Crohn's disease. And that essentially affects the gastrointestinal tract with inflammation that's quite chronic. And that can basically stop you from absorbing most of your nutrients. So when I was 18, I saw a naturopath who literally changed my diet, educated me about, the right food choices to make for someone with Crohn's, to optimize my digestion, to optimize the nutrients that I need to absorb, and literally changed my diet and changed my life. And so that set me on the trajectory of, wanting to make more informed choices with what I'm eating, so that I could help myself. And then that ignited the passion for, it's worked wonders for my health. I need to be able to do this for other people. And that's what set me on the path to study for a Bachelor of Health Science, Nutritional Medicine, and start my career as a clinical nutritionist.
So what do you think was what do you think is the reason that people develop IBS or Crohn's disease? Is there any kind of information as to what contributes to it?
There's multiple research papers out there with IBD specifically. We can talk about IBS as well, but inflammatory bowel disease, which is what I was diagnosed with, there's still a very unclear knowledge as to how it starts within conventional medicine. However, me as a naturopathic holistic nutritionist, there are studies that I reference which show it's called an autoimmune triad. So 3 things that can initiate any kind of autoimmune disease. And the first one is genetics. So we have a genetic susceptibility. The second one is a leaky gut, so having a leaky gut lining, and that can be influenced by diet, stresses, and many other things. And the third one is actually trauma, like a traumatic experience in life, stress, chronic emotional issues. And usually I just gave a talk just a few days ago at a Crohn's and colitis event in Sydney. I was giving a talk as a nutritionist, and I was saying to everyone there how when I go through a stressful event in life, I could be eating the cleanest, training at the gym every day, doing all the right things. But when a stressful event occurs, I experience a flare. And so then because of that, I've started to practice my own sort of mindfulness around, sometimes in life you experience stressful events that you can't control. And so how do I prepare my body for that? Or how do I mitigate that with my diet, with mindful practices that can help support me in those stressful moments so that I don't have a flare with my gut?
And a lot of people say that the gut is like the second brain. I mean, if you have stresses in your life, then that would imply that your emotions are very important in relationship to, I guess you might not think so, but I guess the digestive system and everything and how it works. So what is this relationship between the gut and your emotions?
Yeah, and very, very true. So the gut and the brain, and we're seeing this more and more in research, are intricately linked. And we see this in cases of IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, which is different to IBD. And literally, someone who I see with IBS, usually one of the questions I'll ask the client is, do you experience these sort of IBS symptoms, which is like bloating and digestion, various issues when you're stressed? And most of the time, people will reply, yes, that's when I see a lot of these issues come about when I'm stressed. And so how the gut is linked to the brain and emotions, there's a couple of ways. The first one is the vagus nerve. So there's a nerve that is connected from the brain into our gut nervous system. So we have a few nervous systems in the body. The one that is in our gut is called the enteric nervous system. And so the brain, the central nervous system, is connected to our enteric nervous system through that vagus nerve. And so that's one way that a stressful event can trigger a gut issue. The second way is our gut actually makes most of our neurotransmitters. So all the stress neurotransmitters like serotonin, GABA, these can all calm you down and mitigate stress. Most of these are actually made in our gut. About 80% of serotonin, which is the, like there's medications that doctors give to people who are depressed or have anxiety, it's usually a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, SSRIs, many people know. But the serotonin is actually made in our gut. So if we have an unhealthy gut because of our diet, because of different lifestyle habits, usually diet today, people aren't eating the right foods, that can upset our serotonin, and that can literally create anxiety and even depression in some people. So yeah, there's multiple ways that our gut is connected to our brain. And when we have an unhealthy gut, that can actually be one of the triggers for emotional issues.
Okay, and I've heard you speak about taking a gut microbiome test. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it called?
Yeah, a microbiome test. Yeah.
Yes, a microbiome test. So what is this? Because this is also something that I guess people can just take just to see where they're at, or if their gut is healthy, or if it's maybe in need of some kind of repair. Explain a little bit.
So yeah, the gut microbiome test is something that's integral to my practice as a clinical nutritionist. So it's basically a stool sample test. So I organize for clients for the lab to send the test kit to a client. Basically, they take a stool sample, provide it to the lab, and I get the test results back, and it basically shows me the microbial environment of the gut. And what this shows me, and how the reason why doing a gut microbiome test is so helpful in the overall treatment of a patient who comes to see me, is it shows me if you have a leaky gut. As I mentioned, leaky gut is one of the underlying causes of IBD and skin issues, even depression, and many diseases, inflammatory diseases are influenced by a leaky gut. So it'll tell me if you have a leaky gut. It'll tell me if you have inflammation in your gut. It'll tell me if you have any kinds of pathogenic or disease-causing bacteria living in your gut. And it'll tell me the different types of species living in your gut. And so when we have a look at the microbiome, I always tell people, to simplify it, a healthy gut is one with a diverse ecosystem, like a rainforest of different types of families of bacteria living in your gut. That's what we like to see. And so this test gives me a snippet, a window into what is actually living in your gut. Do we have a flourishing ecosystem in there, or do we have, a couple of little plants here and there, little species of bacteria? So obviously, if I go in and I see you only have, a little bit of, very minute amounts of bacteria and different species in there, we want to increase that. And so I know what approach to take with your diet to help to increase and help your bacteria thrive. Or if there's some unhealthy types of bacteria in there, how do I remove that? How do I weed that out? And what kind of diet is best for you to help optimize your gut health?
Okay, and out of the clients that you've had, because you treat equally like women, men, do you also treat children, or is it mostly adults?
No, I treat children as well. I do specialize in gastrointestinal health and genetics, but I do see children as well.
So out of all of your clients, who do you notice has the most difficulties with their gut health? Do you think that you see a lot of cases that could be related because of the emotion connection in women? Do you see more problems with them or with men, or it just depends?
That's actually an interesting question to reflect upon. I would have to say it's an even balance between women, especially mums who, tend to look after their children more and don't really have time for their own nutrition. And an even keel between a lot of executives. I see a lot of professionals, professional males, real estate agents, people that don't have enough time for the day. They're all about success, being on the road, traveling from, place to place. And yeah, so I'd say there's an even keel between professional men and mums, who don't make enough time for themselves.
Okay. And since this is a faith-based program, I just want to ask you a little bit about your faith, because I notice you also have the crucifix in the background.
Oh, yeah.
You decided to go into holistic nutrition and holistic health. Why did you choose that route? Was there any kind of spiritual reason, or did you have any reason versus maybe doing the traditional, being a traditional nutritionist?
Yes. Well, I understand that, a major contributing factor to me choosing holistic nutrition was the fact that I understand, again, from my own practice, from my own knowledge, that we are not just a two-dimensional being. We are mind, body, and soul. And, I know from my own experiences firsthand that you cannot fix the body without looking at even underlying spiritual and soul connection. And I'll tell you, within my own experiences and experiences of people that I treat, that you can be doing all the things physically and focusing on the physical, but most of the time when you have an underlying spiritual need that's not addressed, that's not fulfilled, it's, you're sort of taking 2 steps forward and 10 steps back with your health. We are a holistic being, and I feel that, and I see within my practice that unless we address all of these areas, you won't be treating the person as a whole. Yeah, and I know with
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, yeah.
Could you give an example of a client maybe that you noticed something like that you were doing a lot to aid them, but they kind of were just in a lower emotional state and it wasn't working?
Definitely, I can think of a couple. I can think of quite a few. All of them being women, because as women, I feel that we're more emotional, we're more empathic, we're more giving, and we're more of a giving natured. There's one in particular that I'll draw upon because I really connected with her because she reminded me of me. And she was in a very toxic relationship with a partner. And she came to see me for skin issues. And, as a holistic nutritionist, when I sit down with you, I start to ask you, when did your symptoms start? And then she started to tell me, when I started this relationship, I started a lot of these gut issues and the skin issues came about. And then she started to open up to me a little bit more. I find that patients really like to, they open up to me. I feel like I've been told that I'm one of those people you can just open up to. And so, she started to unravel how, he wasn't really supportive of her coming to see me. He thought, she's just overreacting, that it's nothing, and she's making a big deal of it. And then she started to disclose a lot of things that were happening within that relationship that were quite unhealthy. And it seemed that he was very controlling of her. And so she really wanted my help, and I told her, let's do a gut microbiome test, and let's basically start to unravel some of these symptoms. Let's look at changing your diet. And she was all on board. She was all on board with me, and she was really keen to start to take that holistic approach. And then when I asked her about you know, what her spiritual life was like. I knew she was a Christian. You know, we got into that conversation, so I knew I always ask, because I don't just see Christians. I see people of all faiths and no faith. But when I know someone is a Christian, and I can, you know, take that extra step into conversation with them. And yeah, she said that he was even controlling that element of that side of her faith. And I said, you know, it's good for you to start. I simply asked her, where do you find your peace? You know, and she said, yeah, before I was in this relationship, I would find my peace from, you know, going to church, from praying, from, you know, all these, she was Catholic, so she said praying the rosary. And she had stopped doing all of that when she entered into this relationship. And so for her, I think it was peeling back the layers. And I said to her, I'm not in a place to advise you spiritually. You know, I'm not your spiritual pastoral guide. But can I tell you, just as a sister, that your soul needs that enrichment. You need to sort of start digging back to where you came from, and don't let anyone get in the way of you practicing your faith. If that's what brings you peace, you know it brings you peace. Because from an energetic level, because I also look at these physical symptoms from an energetic perspective, from energetic blockages. Skin, when we have issues with the skin, it's often associated with when we're holding things underneath our skin, like we're letting things get underneath our skin, you know. And similarly with the gut is what harbors fear. And so, you know, sometimes when people are undoing all the things with some people, you know, we're doing gut microbiome tests, we're changing the diet, I'm giving them herbs, I'm giving them supplementation, and they're still symptomatic. I ask them, you know, where do you feel stuck in life? You know, what is a driving fear that you have? And most of the time, especially with women, they will identify fears that they're holding on to. And so their gut is holding on to a lot of that as well. And so from a holistic perspective, you know, asking these questions, peeling back the layers, delving deep, helps me understand how the root cause of a lot of these diseases that come to me, you know, where traditional medicine doesn't dig this deep. You know, they'll just give you a tablet, send you on your way. Whereas, you know, and a lot of people today, they're not treated effectively because we're not getting to the root cause. And this is where emotions and spiritual beliefs and where we're at from a soul perspective, I believe, has so much influence on our health and disease.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, because sometimes I think, you know, when you tell that to someone, like if you have a friend and you're like, since you've started this relationship, you just don't look the same, you just don't, you know, and it's not that we're making it up or it's in your head, it's actually something that's a physical phenomena that's happening in your body.
Exactly. And it's our close friends that identify that, right? Our close friends, our family, they're the ones that recognize, hey, you know, you've changed as a person, you've aged. You know, I hear that a lot. I know when I was separated, I was in a toxic relationship. As soon as I separated, people were like, what have you done? You look 10 years younger. And so I'm like, yeah, well, I'm living in peace finally, you know. So yeah, it has a major influence. That internal peace has a major influence on our overall health. Yeah.
And you also go into some other therapies that you can try in case you are a bit stressed out. I mean, let's start with the first one that I thought was interesting, and it's called HBOT. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I actually just had a session before I met with you today. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy is basically you go into an enclosed cabin and it's pressurized. The one that I just visited, it's pressurized to the equivalent of going 3 meters underwater. So that pressurization actually helps, and there's oxygen, pure oxygen being, you know, loosened into the, how would you describe it? It's like a booth. Yeah, and you sit in a comfortable recliner and you have this booth with this oxygen hose that's, you know, blowing oxygen into the little container. And that pressurization actually helps to push the oxygen into your cells, which is extremely healing. And there's research that shows that, regular HBOT can actually reduce inflammation. It's very famously used for people with diabetes, with wounds that don't heal, because with diabetes, you have a compromised ability to heal. So if you have a wound, it can actually help to heal them if you regularly attend HBOT. With Crohn's and gut issues, it can reduce inflammation in the body, in the gut as well. It can actually help so people who are deficient to iron, many women are deficient to iron. And what iron does, it helps to boost hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is what allows oxygen to travel all around the body, from the head down to our toes. And so when we have compromised iron, we usually get breathless, we become breathless, or hair starts to fall out, a lot of these symptoms. And that's because there's not enough oxygen traveling to all of these places. And so a session of HBOT ensures that your body is actually pushing oxygen into all of the needed cells. I'm treating someone with cancer at the moment, working with someone who has cancer, and HBOT is actually quite beneficial for people with cancer as well, because cancer occurs when the cells are deprived of oxygen. And with our busy lifestyles and, people not going outdoors as much, people are more indoors these days, someone with cancer, of course, this is not the cure, but it's one step in treating a person. Pushing oxygen into their cells is a great way to help starve cancer cells as well. So multiple benefits of HBOT.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting. It sounds similar to what sometimes you might find in certain spas, but I imagine it's a bit different. No, it's a bit different.
A little bit different, but there are some spas that actually do have HBOT therapy now. It's become almost trendy, especially in Australia and the US. There are lots of places that do have. It's different than just sitting at an oxygen bar and inhaling oxygen, which is what a lot of places do. But this is actually, you're in an enclosed sort of like booth. It's pressurized, and then you're inhaling the oxygen.
Yeah, very nice. And you also speak about ice baths. This I've done. That one is not for the weak. Can you explain?
Not. It's not for the faint-hearted. That's right. Ice baths, quite interesting. So at first, people like Gary Brecker, a lot of these biohackers that want to stay young forever, they're very prominent in, the social sphere. They put it on the map for the most part. Actually, it was Wim Hof first that put it on the map, and then everyone we created these ice baths. But essentially what ice baths are supposed to do for the body is, when you enter into the ice bath, the shock is supposed to stimulate your mitochondria. Now, your mitochondria, we're getting very sciencey in this talk. Your mitochondria, a simple way to look at them is they're sort of like the batteries of your cells. And as we age, those batteries, they tend to decline, they tend to die down, they become tired. And so one of the most recommended ways of, preventing disease is doing things that are going to promote your mitochondrial health. So just imagine, like, you want to always have those little batteries in your cells on charge. So a way that, to promote anti-aging, to prevent disease, is what can we do to enhance our mitochondrial function, especially as we get older. And so, jumping into an ice bath and then out and then heating yourself is the best way to do it. And that basically helps to stimulate that mitochondrial function. It's a great way to start the day. The reason I started to do ice baths was, again, it was a couple of years ago. It was a very challenging time in my life where I was dealing with a flare. And again, it was from a very stressful event in life. And I was on a liquid diet, and that was going to heal my gut. And so mentally, I had to do something that was going to strengthen me mentally, emotionally, physically, to endure this 3 months of not being able to eat food. And so I said, what can I do to strengthen myself mentally. I need to get out of my comfort zone. That's what I need to do. And that's what I bought myself an ice bath. I put it in the yard, and every morning without fail, I said the next 3 months, every single day, I'm going to have an ice bath. And, you know, for women, more research is showing that, you know, very cold is actually not good for our hormones. So, you know, men can endure colder temperatures. For me, I will put like just a bag of ice in there, and that's enough for women in general. We don't want to reduce it to more than, you know, 14 degrees Celsius. So that's a good temperature. That's still quite cold. It's a bit of a shock in the morning. So mentally, you know, when I was every morning getting up before everyone got up into the bath, saying a little prayer in there while I was in there, like I would say, you know, and Our Father, and then I'd say like a Hail Mary, and that was my timer. And then I'd get out and I'd do some jumps, you know, because I don't have a sauna. So I would do jumps, which is quite good to stimulate, to really help your joints as a woman, especially, you know, when we're jumping up and down, that actually strengthens our bones in our joints. And I would get some sun, and then I would do my deep breathing exercises in the morning. And that was a great way for me to start my day mentally strong, ready to take on the challenges of the day. And that's what I feel I needed to do to endure that next 3 months of just being on a liquid diet, being surrounded by food that my family was eating. And for me, knowing that I had to be on this liquid diet to just rest my gut. And that was extremely healing. So I was to the point, I was so inflamed in my gut from this traumatic experience before that I actually needed surgery, the doctor said, and I was adamant I didn't want to have surgery. So I went on to this liquid diet, highly nourishing liquid diet for 3 months, and basically was healed into remission after that. But I really needed to strengthen myself mentally, and that's why, you know, the ice baths every morning were extremely helpful. Yeah. And I highly encourage women, men to, you know, try ice baths. The only thing for women is don't go too cold. And if you're already stressed, this can actually be a stressor on the body. So if you're someone who's already quite anxious and quite stressed, I wouldn't recommend ice baths for those people. And the science shows that as well.
Okay, so for someone who's more stressed out, they can have the other option of grounding. Now, this one I do try as much as I can. I live in a nice area here in France, and I go out and it's very grassy, standing on the grass. This is something more, I guess, easier on someone who maybe suffers from shock or anxiety.
Most definitely. Yes, most definitely. And it's a great practice. So when I'm speaking with patients, with my clients who are quite stressed, I'll definitely ask them, you know, how much time do you spend out in nature? Most of the time they'll say, oh, I don't have time. You know, it's, you know, coming, you know, taking the kids to school, coming home, doing the housework or going to work. And so just a simple practice I tell people is, you know, as soon as you come home from work, take your shoes off and simply connecting your bare feet to the earth, you know, whether it's in the backyard or you have a park, you know, close to your area, or you live near a beach, for example, simply taking your shoes off, walking barefoot. When you connect your feet to the earth, you're sharing that frequency, the earth's frequency. And what that does, that actually travels up through your body and is quite anti-inflammatory. It's tremendously anti-inflammatory, reduces inflammation in the body. And it's also a great way to calm your nervous system, tremendously good to calm your nervous system. And a lot of people experience a lot of disease today, especially women who are, you know, overworked. Their mums, you know, mums are usually wearing multiple hats. And so just a simple practice. What I even do is when I don't have time, you know, in Australia, we have clotheslines. We don't have dryers. You know, we can use a clothes dryer, but we like to use the sun. And so I'll mindfully take my shoes off, and then I'll go out into the yard and I'll put the clothes on the line while I'm earthing my feet, you know, and it's quite helpful. You'll actually see that, and I've experimented with holding a niece. She was crying, and then I literally took my shoes off, went outside with her in my arms, and then she just calmed down. Because, you know, the earth, the frequency traveled through me into her, and that just soothed her and calmed her right down. So yeah, the magic of grounding. And then if you don't have access, like if you live in an apartment or you're in the office, or you want some extra grounding frequency, another practice that I utilize is I use grounding sheets. So I use mine are from Grounding Well, which is a company, it's in the US and Australia and Europe as well, actually. And so there's grounding sheets that you literally plug into a switched off electrical plug, and that emits the earth frequency to the sheet that you sleep on in the evening. And then there are grounding mats in the office where literally if you are working around toxic people, or you're not, people that aren't your favorite people to be around, that can be quite stressful on the body as well. So you pop the mat on the ground and you earth your feet while you're in the office. And that gives you that beautiful healing frequency, earth's frequency traveling through your body. And that can be so helpful to help reduce inflammation and really soothe the nervous system.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And you can use it, I like that, in the office, and nobody will notice if you have your desk there that you're actually just, ignoring them and trying to maintain your calm. Does it have a specific number of hertz that it passes through it? Would you know if it's what is the max?
That is a great question. It does have a hertz number. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But you can go to the website, so groundingwell.com, and they will have that information there. Definitely.
Okay, so I'll link it also in the podcast for anyone who's interested in it, and they can also find it on your page. So I'll link everything in the podcast later.
Yeah,
Let's talk about now the actual eating aspect of holistic nutrition. So I don't know. I've heard so many different things. I've heard that you might go into an app and they'll say, okay, how old are you? Okay, you should be eating this. You should be eating that. So I don't know. And then I've heard other things that say that you should be eating alkaline. Other places say that you should be eating based on your blood type. What is the right way to eat, in your opinion?
Yeah, great question. And I think that's like the multi-million-dollar question that everyone wants to know, right? And there are so many overwhelming answers out there, and with social media, websites, we're living in an information age. It can be quite confusing. And so the answer is there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to diet. And me as a clinical nutritionist, this is what I do. I will speak to you as an individual. I will look at your hormone levels. I will look at any symptoms you might have. You might feel bloated when you eat bread. You might feel bloated or need to run to the toilet when you have dairy. And so what works for you might not work for the person next to you. And so this is when I sit down with you and we have a look to see, what is creating symptoms for you. Again, what is your gut health like? Microbiome testing, as I mentioned earlier, can be helpful. But just very generally, to give you a general answer, so you want to be able to include protein in every meal. So like breakfast, lunch, dinner is a good amount, having a good amount of protein. What I tell people is around 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. And of course, this is very general, like people with kidney disease, I would minimize their protein intake, for example, but again, just very general. And then, trying to maximize your vegetable intake. So I advise people, colorful vegetables, eating from the rainbow is what's good. So eating a diverse amount of colors is what creates a diverse gut microbiome in your gut. So, and a diverse gut microbiome is a healthy gut. And that's why, this is the main thing that I see in people when I'm looking at diets. They don't eat enough vegetables or they're not eating enough protein. And these are the main two things. And the third one is a lot of people miss out on healthy fats. Unfortunately, depending on how old you are, I remember in the late 80s, 90s, there was this low fat craze that was traveling throughout the world. And, fat was evil. But in fact, most of our cells are actually made of fat. A lot of people don't realize that most of our brain is made of fat. And so when we cut out the healthy fats from our diet, we need to be able to realize that can have a major impact on our cells. It can have a major impact on inflammation and our healing, concentration. And so including healthy fats like your avocados, your wild fatty fish like your wild salmon, wild sardines, wild mackerel, your good extra virgin olive oil. You're in a lovely place of the world there. You're not far from Italy, which is my favorite place to get olive oil from, and Greece actually. And so, so you're getting your healthy fats in. And then, with the carbohydrates, some people, and because I deal with a lot of gut health issues, a lot of people that I see have issues with gluten, which is found in your wheat and your breads and your pastas and these sorts of foods. So a lot of the people that I see with gut issues, we sort of take the gluten foods out and replace it with other healthy grains, because grains are very important as well. And I would replace it with things like rice or wild rice or quinoa, buckwheat, various different things we can replace with. But yeah, to sort of answer your question, it's not a one size fits all approach. Everyone is different. But, from a very general perspective, trying to get your protein in every meal, your healthy fats and a variety of vegetables is really key. And then, to answer your question about the various diets, things like the blood type diet, I've read about the blood type diet. There's a practitioner in Australia who specializes in the blood type diet. And, for those who don't know the blood type diet, so we all have various blood types, from A, AB, B, O, and then there's a universal blood type. And so the premise of that is that each blood type needs to eat a specific type of diet. So me as an O, I'm supposed to be a meat eater. I have to avoid breads and pork and dairy. Funnily, that actually works really well for me. But I've seen clients where they have been an O and, that doesn't work well for them. And so the reason I don't practice blood type diets personally as a practitioner is because there's not much research out there. There's no scientific research out there to confirm its effectiveness. So as a clinical practitioner, I need to use evidence-based research to, confirm the diets that I prescribe for people.
And you mentioned also, you said breakfast, lunch, dinner. As far as a general idea, because we live in a world, like I will admit, like I might not start eating breakfast, which turns into a brunch, maybe until almost 1 sometimes. And I'm not talking about like if I'm fasting, I just mean as a routine. So is there a general guideline, a healthy guideline of how much you should be consuming a day, as far as like you should have a meal in the morning, a meal, like how often should we be eating?
Yeah, so that all depends on your activity levels. So again, people who are younger, who are, running to school, they have high energy levels. They're very active. Like a lot of kids, for example, they would need, a moderate amount of calories in their diet. And they should definitely not be fasting. They should have their breakfast, lunch, dinner, and even their snacks in between, because their bodies are growing. They need that extra energy, and focusing on things like their calcium, their protein. These are all bodybuilding nutrients. But it depends on every stage. And so women during menstrual phases, they need more iron, they need more B12, more folate, and, a lot of the time, this is the beauty of research. With men, it's quite simple. Most of the research has been done on men out there, all the clinical research. So a lot of the intermittent fasting research has been done on men. And so we're only just now in the more later years, literally in the last, 5 years, we've been looking at how intermittent fasting affects women. And it's so different from men. And so with men, generally intermittent fasting is basically, a window of eating. So, for example, fasting for for 14 hours and eating within like a 6-hour window, for example. That's a popular type of intermittent fasting. That can be fine for men. But for women, a lot of the research is showing that intermittent fasting, that is like skipping breakfast, for example, and going straight to lunch and dinner, or, you know, breakfast, lunch, and then skipping dinner, can sort of disrupt our hormones as women. And so there are people, women specifically, who I would definitely not recommend intermittent fasting to. These are women who I'm trying to balance their hormones. They're coming to see me with hormonal imbalances. When we really want to balance her hormones, we don't want to put her in sort of a starvation phase, which is what intermittent fasting can do, because it's sort of like a shock to the body. Women who have hypothyroid issues definitely should not fast. They actually need to eat small meals throughout the day just to keep their insulin levels steady. But then, you know, the women who are generally healthy, who don't have any hormonal imbalances, who don't have thyroid issues, intermittent fasting can definitely work, but I wouldn't recommend it every single day. What I generally recommend is, you know, alternate days. So one day you can intermittent fast, the next day don't, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and that's just to keep our hormones even balanced.
Yeah, and that's usually, in my case, I do it more for religious reasons. So I usually will fast twice a week, and it's only like I might do from, like, when I'm doing it intermittently like this, I might do it from maybe 6 till 6 in the evening, but only twice. But I always recommend fasting, but I always mention, like what you said, it really depends on your body. There's other ways also if you want to like sacrifice or make sacrifices to God, but it depends on your body. So as Deena said, it's not a one size fits all shoe.
Exactly. And especially for women, I would say, because our bodies are a lot more complex. You know, we're created to create human beings within us, you know, and so our hormones are very different. Definitely during pregnancy, I wouldn't recommend intermittent fasting. And, you know, during your luteal phase of your menstrual cycle, for those women who are menstruating. So the luteal phase is like the week and a half or so before your menstrual cycle. That time is actually when the body craves more carbohydrates. It craves more energy, which is why a lot of women, they say, oh, they're craving chocolate before their menstrual cycle and that sort of thing. So that's the time during the cycle that you want to increase your carbohydrate. That's not a time to sort of skimp out on your calories.
Okay, so thank you so much, Deena, for coming on the show. If anyone wants more information about her grounding mats and you want to take a look at her webpage, I'm going to have it linked in the podcast. And be sure, everyone, to also subscribe to sacredmindshift.com to keep posted on all the latest events and podcasts coming up in the future. And thank you so much, Deena, for sharing all of that nutritional insight with us.
Thank you, Dahlia. Thank you for inviting me on. It was a pleasure to talk with you today.
See you next time. God bless. Bye-bye.